It makes sense that you can have the reader know something, but not the point of view character, not the character that it's going to happen to.
Pulling them into like what's going to happen next, right? That's the most important question you want them to constantly be asking. What's going to happen next?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't throw in curveballs, if you don't manage your information properly, then they'll be bored and they won't even know why.
Let's talk about trauma and characters and
Yeah.
conveying trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that part was easy because I'm a psychiatrist and I deal with people that have severe trauma all the time.
Welcome back to the Wax Quill Podcast. Woohoo!
Glad to have you here, guys. Today I am talking to Erik Goodwyn. He's not just a writer, he's also a speaker, and he is a psychiatrist. Sorry, I can never say that word very well, which is funny. You'd think I'd be better at that, knowing myself a bit better. So, you have written several nonfiction books already. Can you tell me a bit about those before we dive in?
Sure. So I've written a book, well, several books. The first book that I wrote was called The Neurobiology of the Gods. It's about neuroscience as it interfaces with Jungian psychology. So that's kind of like my major thing is I'm very big into that. That's where I've done a lot of lectures in that subject. But I'm big into psychotherapy. Obviously, being a psychiatrist, I do the medications and the neuroscience and all that as well. And so from there, I've got a few more books as well. Healing Symbols and Psychotherapy, and Understanding Dreams. I'm very big into the dream interpretation that kind of plays into the fiction writing, as we'll get into. And then the most recent book that just came out this year, it just so happened that I wound up being able to publish both the fiction and the nonfiction within 12 months of each other, which is kind of bizarre. It wasn't intended. But that is a Jungian analysis of toxic modern society. So that's kind of a spicy take, talking about like cultural influences on mental health, which an astute reader, if you read the fiction, you'll see that that's in there too.
Oh, fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. I want to read that now. Okay, I wanted to have this
it's
in
already
the introduction.
Available. You don't have to worry about pre-order.
Okay, yeah. Maybe yeah. Okay, I forgot to mention this in the intro. He has a fiction book now, which is infused with psychology and all sorts of incredible things. I read it. It was delicious, guys. It was so good. So, first off, yeah, what made you go from writing a bunch of nonfiction books to fiction?
So King of the Forgotten Darkness is the fiction novel. It comes out officially in March, but it is available for pre-order. Definitely check that out. But that has been in my head for years. I actually started working on the fiction writing before I even got into psychiatry.
Oh.
Yeah, long time ago. So it's just many years in the making. I think actually that nonfiction is easier to write than fiction is, because nonfiction you can do all of this really cool stuff, but in fiction you've got to make it entertaining as well, and that's not always the easiest thing to do. But judging by your reaction, you felt like you were entertained.
Oh yeah,
I think, yeah, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback from it so far. But yeah, it's something that I've been very passionate about for many years, just as a labor of love, if you will. And of course, somebody, you got to pay the bills, so I want to go in hard on that. But but yeah, I've been in huge lover of fantasy all the way back, as long as I can remember. I've read sci-fi too, but fantasy is like that's my favorite genre.
Yeah, because yours had just
I've learned
a sprinkle of sci-fi is how it felt at the beginning.
Yeah. There's definitely some of that in there. There's elements of both in it that I try to weave together in the story.
Oh, it was good. Oh, it was so good. I liked it a lot, and I liked the Scottish kind of background-ish. I don't even know how to say that very well, but it was very interesting. Very interesting.
Well, maybe we should kind of go into a bit about what it's about. I mean,
yes.
In the novel, so we're going to do light spoilers today, I think. Nothing major. But in the novel, you have two worlds. There's Midworld, which is our world, but in the future a little bit. And you can tell that it's our world because I reference like real world things like Jameson whiskey and stuff like that. But the other world is called Arantir, and that's a magical world of chaos and all sorts of magic and monsters and everything
It's
else.
awful.
And the people of Midworld have figured out how to lock away Arantir because it was causing them so many problems over the centuries. And the story starts with Liam, who he was from Arantir, and he was a refugee, the last refugee from Arantir before the last door was closed. But he was a child at the time. And he makes it safely to Midworld, where there's no conflict or war, and everybody's taken care of. It's a utopian society, or is it? So sometimes I tell people this is kind of like a cross between Brave New World and Shadow of the Gods, or Uprooted, one of those two. I think it kind of suits the tone there if you could blend those together. Well, it turns out that every one of his family members was killed in Arantir except one, but he doesn't know that until he's much older. So he's in his mid-20s when he finds out that his mother is still alive in Arantir, and so he has to illegally go back into it in order to try to save her. And he's terrified to do that because he's got nothing but nightmares and trauma from Arantir. And of course, the rules are totally different in a magical world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I don't want to spoil it. I don't know exactly what to say. I loved the dreams, and I didn't know at the time when I read his dreams that you have an entire book about that, which is cool because I always thought dreams were cool, right? I thought they were interesting. And then I went to Mexico for 6 years, and they're really big into dreams, at least the people I was surrounded by. And they're like, oh, I would say, oh yeah, I had this really weird dream last night. There were like eggs there. Oh, what color were the eggs? Were they white or were they brown? It's like, I don't know. Why? Well, if it's white, it means this. If not, then this. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I was at a wedding. No, that's horrible. Oh, I dreamed that this person died. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it'll be fine. So anyway, it really made me very interested about dreams. And in writing, I've noticed, and I've done some of my own, and a lot of my first books, I wrote dreams, but they always felt really superficial. Dreams don't make sense, and they're not consistent, but they're so full of emotion. And when people write, oh, she dreamed that the exact thing she's afraid of was happening, and she woke up in a cold sweat. But yours wasn't like that at all.
No, it wasn't. I've read on my quest to write to get a fantasy novel published. I did the same thing that I did in my nonfiction writing. I went whole hog bananas with the research, and so I've read a ton of stuff about, and I'm taking classes and everything about fiction writing. And one of the things that comes to mind is Robert McKee's book. I think he's the one who says this, but he says that a scene that's a dream is basically a flashback in a ball gown.
Oh,
right. Yeah. But I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. If it's going to be an authentic feeling dream, then you should incorporate what we know about dreams into it. In which case, it's no longer just a fancy flashback. Kind of what you're talking about. I've seen that too, where they're dreaming and it's really just a permutation of what they're anxious about. So the writer's trying to show us rather than tell us that the patient or the person is very anxious, and so they'll write a scene like that. But I think if I'm going to write a dream, I'm going to do what I know about dreams and put it in there, which in my line of work, what we talk about in terms of dreams is a dream definitely it'll have anxieties in there, but it also shows you things that you don't necessarily notice, because the psyche is much bigger than just the ego. And if I'm, say, I have an inner conflict, it may show me that in terms of I'm facing an alter ego, say, who has a different view And you'll notice too, there's a character in here who appears in sort of a recurrent nightmare for Liam. He shows up and he makes these accusations towards him and all this, but these are reflections of his own feelings about himself.
Mm-hmm.
But see, that kind of leads us to like, okay, what about the fantasy element in general, right? So like, why write fantasy? That's a question. I think fantasy has the potential to be the most realistic of all the genres. Now you might say, what? That's crazy, because in fantasy, anything can happen, right? Yes, but if you look at the fantasy elements as metaphors or symbols, then it operates just like dreams do. And dreams reflect our inner dynamics, see? But they do it in these visual spatial symbols. When fantasy, I can do that and like have an actual character chasing after him, who's reflecting his own survivor guilt. And he's a physical character in the story. And because I'm not constrained by the rules of physics in a fantasy story, then I can be as precise about the symbols as I want to be. And nobody can say anything because it's fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But the very strength of fantasy, I think, is also its weakness too. In the sense that because it's fantasy, I can also make it a bunch of frivolous, silly, shiny stuff, that's just there for cool factor.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that out there. Nothing necessarily wrong with it, but it doesn't speak to anything more, on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a fantasy fan, I think most fantasy fans kind of know the difference when they're reading something that's just got a lot of cool whiz bang stuff, or if the images and the fantasy elements are actually reflective of something real within, but in symbolic form.
So is a key to that the work on the character instead of a focus on the world building?
No, it's both.
No.
It's
Oh,
all
okay.
the above. Yeah. So if I'm writing, I want to say I have a theme that I'm trying to tell, right? I'm a big believer in if you're writing a story, you should have a theme of some kind. Not everybody believes that, but I mean, there's successful stories that don't have much of a theme, like say Ghostbusters, for example. Well, I don't know what the theme is of that. Have fun and get rid of ghosts or something. I don't know. But if you're going to have a story that has a theme, then the setting and the characters and the plot should all revolve around that theme. And see, this is where I think the strength of fantasy is. And the setting can be a very strong reflection of your theme in symbols. If someone well, just take, for example, the Incredible Hulk, right? So the Incredible Hulk turns into this big, invulnerable rage monster when he's angry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can look at that and say, well, that's actually a pretty accurate metaphor for uncontrolled rage or very primitive rage. And someone, say, who has childhood trauma or neglect, where they just got very poor emotional regulation, Hulk smash. I mean, that's pretty accurate. Imagine if the Hulk only turned into the Hulk if he fell asleep in a gazebo. That doesn't, I mean, that's just silly. It wouldn't feel authentic. It would feel goofy. And there's a lot of fantasy is goofy. But I think there's a reason why that character is very popular, because his superpower, as it were, the magical, fantastical element of it, is actually reflective of a real world emotional reality, but it's, subjective. When we get really angry and we feel out of control, we do things that we regret later. I mean, you can see this not just in The Incredible Hulk, but things like werewolves, or any sort of story where Jekyll and Hyde, where you lose control of your emotions. Right? And all of us feel that at some point or another. So we resonate with it without necessarily recognizing that that's what it's doing. But if we were having a dream about it, then it would probably look like that. Like I'm turning into this monster. Something like that, because I feel out of control.
Interesting. I could talk about this the whole time, but let's go into the questions that I wanted to ask, and then we can cruise right on back here. So
it's about trauma and magic systems and when to reveal secrets. I think we're the three questions.
The secret one is the one I really, really want to talk about. So let's talk about secrets. Now, I want to tell a little story first. So, the first book that I finished writing, that will probably never see the light of day, um, I wanted it to be this cool, like heist, mystery, love story, right? So it was all of those swirled together. And it
That's
took me,
tough. That's a tall order. There's a lot
uh,
going on with that.
yeah, there was.
Mhm.
But I ended up, anyway, a lot. I talk about this book a lot because I messed it up so much, but I learned a lot. But one thing I
Sure.
did was I had a murder right at the beginning, and no one knows what happened or why this good woman was killed. But
Hmm.
then her daughter is getting followed, and so she runs away and then gets in this like small town and blah blah blah. Well, and then I like paused the book. So the first third is one thing, the middle third is a completely different thing because she's stuck in this town, and an old childhood friend is actually there. And his grandmother is like, "Oh, this is perfect. He's been a menace to society. He needs to get married. His childhood friend is here. This is perfect." And she like sets up this whole thing where it's like an obstacle course that lasts for weeks. And the whole point of it is the elders of the town made it so that young people will get married. And then I stopped at the very last thing. This like car shows up and she gets kidnapped. And then we're back into the mystery, right? So
Hmm.
it was the best I could do at the time. But when people read it, they're like, okay, what the heck is going on? We have this piece, like we have this clue, we have this clue. She thinks this thing, this other thing happened, nothing that makes sense. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, it's a mystery. It's not supposed to make sense until the very, very end, like last 10 pages is when
Hmm.
everything was explained. Well, now I've learned from that is you shouldn't do that because people are just confused and they're going to lose interest.
Yeah.
You need to leave
Yeah.
like a little breadcrumb. Oh, here's a clue, here's a small
Hmm.
resolution. It takes us to this point. Little things to help you keep going so you feel a sense of progress.
Yeah.
Yours was impeccable. How did
Oh,
you do
thank
it?
you. Okay. Well, I think first I've run into that. I mean, past drafts, other stories that I've written, I've had the same problem. So, I mean, this is everyone, all of us have to go through this. I guess it's like a rite of passage. And it's when you get to a certain point, you realize that clarity has to take top priority over pretty much everything else. Because if your reader is not really sure what's going on, their eyes will glaze over and you're dead in the water, within a few sentences. So if you're going to reveal a secret, you have to first show the reader like this is a question that you're supposed to be wondering about. Well, what is this? X, and then how do I figure it out? And I think it's the question that needs to be answered has to be as clear as it can possibly be for the reader, rather than like I've heard it. I remember a long time ago. I forget. I wish I knew who it was that said this, but it's always stuck with me. It was if you're going to be obscure, do it in a straightforward manner, right? Don't try to just throw a bunch of mysterious woo-woo stuff at your reader and go, "See, I'm being so mysterious." No, 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 none of that. It's like a murder was committed, and we know somebody was responsible, but we don't know who it is. How can we find that out? Get them on the track. Um, I can imagine you ran into a lot of trouble with the structure that you described here because
I did,
once you
yeah.
get into this middle part, you're like, okay, wait a minute, what about the murderer guy? And
Uh-huh.
so you
Yeah.
lost a lot of people from there. Maybe I'll use an example here. So there's a character in King of the Forgotten Darkness that has a secret, and let's just say that there's a certain point in the story where um, Liam realizes that a character that he is facing is much, much worse and much more powerful than he previously thought. Okay. So there's a lot of setup. If you know the scene I'm talking about, there's a lot of setup there to make the reader think one thing so that then I could gobsmack him with it later. Now, I think a clever reader will be able to figure this out. And I think it's important not to try to outsmart readers. If they're
Mm.
paying close enough attention, they're going to figure it out. It's not the end of the world. It's okay. As long as the POV character You don't portray them as an idiot, and they're surprised, even if the reader saw it coming. That's good. I think you're good. I mean, just think about the fact that some of us watch the same movie over and over again.
Right.
We know exactly what's going to happen, but it doesn't matter because we relive it through the eyes of the character, and we, get that emotional involvement and punch from it. So there's a number of points at which I could have revealed that, but I wanted to pick, and here's I guess the second part of your question. The first part is how you set it up right. Make sure that the question, or at least the misleading piece of information, is there for everyone to see, so that I'm thinking this one thing, say that this character is very dangerous, but I have a chance. I may be able to beat him. And then run into a situation where you realize you can't beat this guy. There's no way you can beat him, and you're toast if you don't get out of here right now. So if you think about it, there's a couple different ways I could have revealed that. I could have revealed it as a casual conversation. Oh, by the way, this guy is way worse than you ever thought, and like disconnected from the actual action. That would have been a huge mistake. Instead, I wanted to make it to where the reveal is as impactful as it can be in the moment that it's happening. So when he's nose to nose with this guy is when that comes, when he realizes that even though I'm fighting this guy, I know that there's absolutely no way I can beat this guy. And he's way worse than I ever thought he could possibly be. If you don't do it in the exact moment, like face to face like that, I think you miss an opportunity to do a real emotional punch for your story.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I love mysteries, but I also think I'm very clever. So I'm always watching mystery shows and I'm like, oh, it's that person for sure. And I'm usually right, which makes me think I'm so smart. But and I guess that's why when I was writing that book, I was like, oh yes, I know the answer, but you don't. I'm smarter than you, which I'm a parent now, so my ego, I guess my pride is a lot lower. But anyway, with your
you've
book,
gotten perspective.
Yes, I've gotten some perspective.
Yeah.
With the story, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about it. The first part, I might give a little spoiler. I don't know if it's much of a spoiler.
Go ahead.
But I thought it was really interesting how you had Liam, figures out, oh, something is up, and he's kind of freaking out about it, and he has to go confront someone who could get him into really big trouble, and he has to act cool, like he doesn't know what's going on, and he's doing his very best to be calm about it. And then he gets out of there, like the guy doesn't know what's going on, and then he leaves, and you're like, oh, whew, he's out of there, we're good. And then the next scene, I was shocked when it's from that other character's perspective, and then someone gives him a tip, like, oh, actually, here's what's really going on, and you're like, whoa, that was all for nothing. Like, he played it cool for what? And then you say exactly what's going to happen. So we know that character is like, oh, okay, let me do this thing to stop him. And then the scene after that, oh, we're back to the main character's perspective, and you know what's going to happen. And that was actually more engaging to me, which I was not expecting. But even though I knew it was happening, like you had already spoiled it for me, but I still wanted to keep reading it. It was more interesting. And now that you say clarity is king, you said it in a more poetic way, but
actually, I like that. Clarity is king.
Oh, okay, we'll go with that then. Clarity is king. Yeah. It makes sense that you can have the reader know something, but not the point of view character, not the character that it's going to happen to, and will suffer the consequences of it.
Yeah.
So that completely changes the game as the writer.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is, I guess you could call it information management, right? So what does the reader know, and what do the characters know? And if those differ, then you've got dramatic irony. But there's a lot of different kinds. There's the kind where the reader knows something that the POV character doesn't know, which is what you're talking about, a scene where Liam doesn't know that somebody has got it in for him and is going to drop the hammer on him in any moment. And he's blundering into the next scene, oblivious of this problem. So because the reader knows that, there's tension. It's the classic example is Hitchcock's two people talking to each other, and there's a bomb under the table, and the audience knows the bomb is there, but the characters talking don't know, right? So that's that type of dramatic irony. There's another one where the POV character knows more than the reader does, and you'll see this. I employ this as well in King of the Forgotten Darkness, where near the end, Liam composes a plan, but I don't tell the reader what the plan is necessarily until it's unfolding in front of them. And that's more interesting than I'm going to do this. And then they do this. That's boring.
Mm-hmm.
See? So you always want to, you want the reader to be learning something or pulling them into like, what's going to happen next, right? That's the most important question you want them to constantly be asking, what's going to happen next?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't throw in curveballs, if you don't manage your information properly, then they'll be bored and they won't even know why.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be just saying, and giving you that incredibly frustrating feedback of, well, it was all right. Mm-hmm. Damning with faint praise, and then you're dead in the water. Mm-hmm. So I think that's Tolkien. I think Tolkien does this magnificently. I don't know if you've read Lord of the Rings.
I have. It's been a long time. I need to read it again.
Yeah. I'm actually listening to the audiobooks now and revisiting it. It was read by Andy Serkis.
Oh, yes.
Magnifique. Yeah, it's great stuff. But he does this very well from a number of different perspectives, for a number of different reasons. Like for one thing, he's telling the story almost entirely from the point of view of little people who are weak compared to everybody else around them. That's inherently more interesting because you've got all of these forces and they're constantly the underdog, so that, but also because I don't have any scenes from Gandalf's point of view, if you've noticed that, this is something that modern fantasy authors would have no problem doing. Say, they would have a scene from Gandalf's point of view and a scene from Elrond's point of view and all this kind of stuff, a scene from the Balrog's point of view, who knows? They're modern fantasy authors are just, wild with this. But he was really strict about it, and I think it works really well, and maybe it's kind of underrated, in fact. So when you stick to one, and even though you've got stuff going on around the POV character, you don't just jump around and show what everybody's point of view is, then you don't run into this situation, which is what you're talking about, where the characters are walking into a situation that you already know what's going on because you've seen it from the other point of view, and you're just kind of waiting around for the POV character to catch up with you.
Yeah.
That's boring. And it happens a lot, especially in these massive epic fantasies like Brandon Sanderson or Steven Erikson. And I really like those guys. But I noticed that this is one of the trade-offs. In doing all that bouncing around, it comes with advantages, but the disadvantages that a lot of times they're having to catch up with what I already know is going on in, the great castle of blah, 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 or the massive battle of XYZ, So I tried to manage that as best I could and keep it pretty tightly limited to a few POV characters and minimize that as much.
You have, I think, 3 is all, right? Oh, 4.
There is one scene from Inwin's point of view.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so but yeah, you do keep pretty.
But for the most part, yeah.
Pretty close.
Keep it pretty tight in, yeah. There's one or two others, but I tried to limit that as much as I could. Mm-hmm. Like there's no scenes from Seabreeze's point of view or Maple's point of view.
No, that would be interesting though. They know everything, kind
or
of.
Or Lungor's point of view.
Yeah, yeah.
That might not be as interesting because he's
figure
kind
out
of
why he puts those random things in his bag that he carries around all the time. Let's talk about trauma and characters and conveying trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that part was easy because I'm a psychiatrist and I deal with people that have severe trauma all the time.
If you're still here, please like, subscribe, and add a comment. It really helps out the channel. And stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about lots of trauma and how to traumatize your characters, and it's fantastic. And if you want to write your own book and have it finished by the end of the year, join Book Bootcamp. It's all about Preptober and NaNoWriMo. Details in the description. Bye, guys!